So what'd you find?
We think we have an entrance to something here.
And it's just got these big blocks in front of it?
Yeah, it's been sealed up.
Is that a tomb? What is that?
In 2024, archaeologists in Petra, Jordan, broke through stone that had sealed shut for 2,000 years. 12 skeletons lay in a circle facing each other, exactly as they had been placed the day they died. One skeleton still gripped a small stone cup, holding on even in death.
How many individuals are in this room?
1, 2, 3, 4,
at least 12.
This sealed room sat beneath the Treasury, where more than 1 million tourists pass every year without knowing what was underneath them. What the team found inside left them asking a far darker question. If this much had stayed hidden for 2,000 years, what else is still buried beneath Petra? The city everyone thinks they know. In 1812, a man walked into the Jordanian desert with a secret that could get him killed. He was not a treasure hunter, but if anyone suspected he was one, that single mistake would be enough to end his life. His real name was Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, but to everyone around him, he was Sheikh Ibrahim. He had spent years learning Arabic and studying Islam, all so he could pass as someone who truly belonged there. He had heard rumors of ruins hidden deep in a mountain valley, but he could not simply ask about them. In this region, any outsider caught searching for old ruins was assumed to be hunting for buried treasure, and treasure hunters were not tolerated. They were robbed, beaten, and sometimes never seen again. So Burckhardt invented a story instead. He told his guide he had made a vow to sacrifice a goat at the tomb of Aaron, the brother of Moses, which locals believed was somewhere in that same valley. It was a lie built to hide a deeper truth, that he was about to walk into a place outsiders were never meant to see. The guide agreed to lead him through a narrow canyon called the Seek. Every step from that point on was a performance. Burckhardt later wrote that a careful, curious look at his surroundings, the kind any normal traveler would naturally give, would have been enough to convince his guide he was a foreigner hunting for treasure, and that he would have been robbed, or worse, on the spot. Then, all of a sudden, Al-Khazni came into view, a massive structure carved straight into solid rock. Burckhardt had to fight every instinct in his body. He could not gasp. He could not stop walking. He could not let his guide see even a flicker of the awe he was feeling. Even though he had just become the first outsider in 600 years to lay eyes on this lost city. Locals had grown up believing this structure held something far more valuable than stone. Parents told their children, and those children grew up to tell their own, that an Egyptian pharaoh had once chased Moses through this land and used magic to hide his treasure inside this exact building. That belief gave it the name Al-Khazni, which means the treasury. For generations, people fired bullets at the stone urn carved into the top of the facade, convinced that one lucky shot would crack it open and send gold pouring out. It never happened. The urn is solid sandstone. Those bullet scars are still visible today, left behind by people who spent their whole lives chasing a legend that was never real. Burckhardt himself never got to enjoy what he had found. Just 5 years later, in 1817, he died of dysentery in Cairo at only 32 years old. He had rediscovered one of the greatest lost cities on Earth, and he never lived long enough to see what it would become. The world did not fully fall in love with Petra until 1989, when Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade used this exact structure as the home of the Holy Grail. Almost overnight, a city that local tribes had guarded for generations turned into a global icon. Today, more than 1 million tourists walk through it every year, and tourism has become one of the country's most important industries. For decades, almost nobody asked what was buried beneath it. But one real mystery had already started long before any of that. In 2003, archaeologists found 2 tombs with partial human remains on one side of the treasury. Nobody knew if the other side held anything at all, and that question would sit unanswered for the next 21 years. And right near the entrance to the city, before any visitor even reaches the treasury, stand massive carved stone blocks that locals still call the Jinn blocks. According to local belief, spirits live inside them, watching and punishing anyone who treats them with disrespect. Both were reminders that this place held far more than what any tourist could see standing on the surface. For 21 years, that question about the other side of the Treasury sat unanswered. Then, in 2024, a small group of researchers finally got the one thing nobody before them ever had: permission to find out. Permission in the scan. For years, archaeologists wanted to dig in front of the Treasury, and every single time the answer was no. This was the most photographed spot in the country. Thousands of people stood here every single day, and if anything went wrong during an excavation, the nation could lose both a national treasure and a major source of income. So officials kept saying no again and again for decades. That changed in 2024. A coalition of major institutions finally won approval. The American Center of Research, the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, and Jordan's own Department of Antiquities agreed to work together under some of the strictest rules ever placed on a dig in this country. This was not a treasure hunt. It was treated as a delicate, careful operation, closer to surgery than excavation. The team was led by Dr. Pierce Paul Kriesman from the American Center of Research and geophysicist Richard Bates from the University of St. Andrews. The rules they had to follow were extreme. Every trench had to be reversible, meaning the ground had to look untouched once the work was done. Every single layer of soil had to be recorded before it was removed. Nothing could be left to chance. Before anyone touched the ground, the team needed to know what was hiding beneath it. They used two tools that let them look underground without digging a single hole. The first was ground-penetrating radar. It works by sending small pulses into the earth. When those pulses hit something solid like rock or a hollow space, they bounce back differently, and that difference builds a rough picture of what's underneath. The second tool measured how easily electricity moved through the ground, which can also reveal hidden walls or empty spaces below the surface. This time, they were not scanning blindly. They already knew the question from 21 years earlier still had not been answered, and this scan was their one real chance to finally answer it. The results came back, and they matched. The pattern on the unexplored side looked almost identical to the tombs already confirmed years before. One team member later admitted the room went completely silent. Nobody could explain why a pattern this clean would appear out of nowhere. That match was strong enough to convince the Jordanian government to finally say yes. Before the dig even started, Kriesman picked up the phone and called Josh Gates, the host of Discovery Channel's Expedition Unknown. He told him straight, "I think we've got something." Nobody on the team knew yet what was actually down there, but for the first time in over 2 decades, they were finally about to find out. On the radar screen, the shape was unmistakable. Not scattered rubble, not random rock. 12 clear, regular forms lined up beneath the ground like nothing anyone had documented at this site before. The scan was enough to prove something was down there. The only way to know what it actually was to start digging. What was waiting inside? Instead of digging straight down, which could have cracked the treasury above, the team cut in carefully from the outside by hand, inch by inch. The deeper they went, the stranger the air became, heavier than it should have been. Then came something nobody expected. A cold draft rose up from below, even though warm air is the only thing that should ever rise from underground in a place this hot. What they found inside stopped the team cold. 12 full human skeletons lay across the chamber floor, arranged in a near-perfect circle. Skulls still rested where heads had once been. Rib cages still curved in place. Hands lay folded exactly where they had been positioned on the day these people were buried. Researchers who had spent decades digging through Petra's tombs said they had never seen anything like it. In almost every other tomb at this site, if any bone survives at all, it is a single fragment, a piece of jaw, a sliver of rib. This chamber held 12 complete bodies, untouched, undisturbed, exactly where they had been laid to rest 2,000 years ago. For a moment, nobody in the chamber said a word. They were not looking at scattered ruins. They were looking at the last living moment of 12 people, frozen in place since long before the Roman Empire ever set foot in this city. Along parts of the chamber floor, something else caught the researchers' attention. Dark patches stained parts of the chamber floor, almost black in places. At first, some team members thought someone had put it there on purpose, but geologists explained it as a natural process, trapped moisture reacting with minerals in the rock over thousands of years. Finding it in a chamber that was supposed to be completely dry still made the scene feel unsettling. Then one of the researchers leaned closer to a single skeleton and froze. Its fingers were still wrapped around something. A small, plain object. It was a chalice, not gold, not decorated with jewels, just a simple cup, the kind of object easy to overlook at first glance. But the way it had been placed, held tightly in the hand of someone who had been dead for 2 millennia, made it impossible to ignore. It looked almost identical to the cup featured as the Holy Grail in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. For a moment it felt like fiction had quietly stepped into reality. The chalice was not alone. Around the chamber, researchers found objects made of bronze, iron, and ceramic, materials that rarely survive together this long without being destroyed or stolen. In Nabatean belief, the dead were not simply buried and forgotten. They were given what they would need for whatever came after death, because death itself was never seen as the end. But even now, with every object recorded and every bone studied, the most important questions remain completely unanswered. Nobody knows the names of these 12 people. Nobody knows how they died or what truly connected them to each other. All of this sits roughly 6.5 feet underground, directly beneath the spot where millions of tourists have taken photographs for 2 centuries, completely unaware of what was resting beneath their feet the entire time. A discovery this precise did not happen by accident, and it did not survive by accident either. To understand how a sealed room like this could outlast 2,000 years untouched, you have to understand the land it was hidden in. The killing ground. Petra looks peaceful today. The stone glows soft red in the sun, and the carved walls feel safe enough to explore with nothing more than a camera in your hand. But thousands of years ago, this exact land was one of the most dangerous places a person could try to survive in. Less than 6 inches of rain fall here in an entire year. There are no rivers nearby to support a large population. In summer, temperatures climb past 40 degrees Celsius. By every normal rule of survival, nobody should have been able to live here at all, let alone build a city. Even ancient writers noticed how strange this was. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus described the people who lived here as completely different from everyone around them. They did not farm. They did not plant trees. They survived entirely on how brutal the desert itself was. He even wrote that any enemy who tried to chase them into this territory would die of thirst long before the locals ever had to fight back. But dryness was never the only danger here. The narrow canyon leading into the city, the same seek that Burckhardt once walked through, can look completely calm one moment and turn deadly the next. Rain falling miles away can send a wall of water tearing through that canyon without a single warning sign on the ground. In April 1963, a group of tourists learned this the hard way. There was no sign of danger as they walked through the seek. A storm had already started miles off in the distance, completely out of sight. Within minutes, a wall of water nearly 30 feet high crashed through the canyon. There was no time to run. 22 people were swept away and killed. Survivors who managed to climb to what they thought was safe, higher ground later said the water still reached their knees, even there. This was never a one-time tragedy. In November 2018, flash floods killed between 11 and 13 people and forced roughly 4,000 tourists to evacuate. As recently as 2022 and 2025, sudden flooding has forced over 1,700 visitors to flee at once. This danger never went away. It is still here today, hiding behind every calm, sunny afternoon. Even history backs this up. Around 312 BCE, an army was sent to invade this land and seize its wealth. That army failed completely, not because of weapons, but because the soldiers could not survive terrain the locals had already mastered. This land has defeated trained armies before it ever had to defeat a single tourist. This same unforgiving land is part of the reason that the sealed chamber stayed hidden for 2,000 years. Anyone dangerous enough to loot it first had to survive long enough to even find it. But surviving here took more than endurance. It took control. The kind of control that turned the same deadly water into something the city could not live without. The architecture of survival. Petra sat in exactly the right spot. Trade routes carrying incense out of Arabia crossed paths here with roads leading toward Egypt and Rome. But reaching this city was never simple. From the outside, all anyone could see was solid mountain rock, with no obvious entrance and no open road. The only way in was through one narrow hidden canyon that outsiders had no real way of finding on their own. Inside that natural fortress, the people who built this city faced a brutal problem. There was almost no water anywhere around them, so they treated every single drop like it was gold. Across the cliffs, they carved miles of narrow channels directly into the rock. These were not random cuts. Each one followed an extremely precise downward slope. If the angle was too steep, the water would move too fast and tear the channel apart. If it was too flat, the water would not move at all. Without any modern tools or machines, they kept this exact balance across miles of uneven stone by hand over generations. They even found a way to use the very floods that could kill people. Instead of letting that water go to waste, they built large stone tanks called settling basins. Muddy floodwater would sit inside these tanks until the cleaner water on top could be carefully drawn off and sent into the next channel. From there, the water moved into hidden reservoirs spread across the city, where it stayed safely stored for months at a time. Altogether, this entire system stretched roughly 125 miles, carved completely into solid stone. The result was almost impossible to believe. In the middle of one of the harshest deserts on Earth, this city had fountains, gardens, and a pool near the Great Temple larger than what many modern cities could ever afford to build. Engineers who study this system today often compare its precision to Roman aqueduct standards. This was built by a people that Greek and Roman writers openly dismissed as primitive desert wanderers with no real skill at all. The same minds capable of solving an almost impossible water problem with this level of obsessive precision were the same minds behind the burial chamber discovered in 2024. The same control, the same intention, just applied to the dead instead of water. This was never a primitive burial thrown together in a hurry by frightened people. It was designed deliberately by people who had already proven they could outsmart a desert. A society this advanced, this in control of its own survival, should not have simply disappeared. But it did. The fall of Petra. If the people who built Petra were skilled enough to outsmart a desert, why did a sealed chamber beneath their greatest monument sit untouched for 2,000 years? The answer starts with how completely this city eventually collapsed. At its height, Petra was nothing like the quiet ruins people see today. It was a living city of roughly 30,000 people, where cultures mixed and languages overlapped every single day. Caravans loaded with incense, silk, and spices moved constant wealth through its streets. The first major shift came in 106 CE, when the Roman Empire, under Emperor Trajan, took control of the Nabatean kingdom. Petra became part of a much larger system. At first, this looked like growth, not decline. Rome expanded the city with long colonnaded streets, improved buildings, and a larger theater built to hold even more people than before. But the real threat was never war. It was trade quietly slipping away. Rome began favoring sea routes through the Red Sea instead of the long, slow desert caravans that had once made Petra essential. Wealth did not vanish overnight. It drained away slowly, year after year, as nearby ports grew stronger and other cities quietly took over the role Petra used to hold. Then came the first physical blow. In 363 CE, a massive earthquake tore through the city, destroying large sections of the water system that had kept it alive for centuries. For a desert city, that was never just damage. It was a direct threat to its ability to survive at all. The second blow landed almost 2 centuries later, and it hit even harder. In 551 CE, another earthquake struck, this time alongside the plague of Justinian, one of the deadliest pandemics in recorded history, sweeping through the Byzantine world at almost the exact same moment. This city was not only crushed by collapsing buildings, it was being torn apart by disease arriving on top of the rubble. Yet Petra held on far longer than most people assume. In 1993, archaeologists found a set of carbonized papyrus scrolls inside a Byzantine-era church in the city, burned in a fire that happened centuries after most people believe Petra had already died out. That fire is the exact reason those scrolls survived at all. They prove Petra still had a working bishop and an active, literate community long after the rest of the world had written it off. By the 7th century, what had once been one of the greatest trade centers in the ancient world had shrunk into something far smaller, far quieter, almost forgotten. Eventually, almost nobody was left behind to ever stumble onto what was sealed beneath the Treasury. A city this empty could not protect a secret on purpose. It simply had no one left to find it. But knowing why the chamber survived does not answer the harder question: who the 12 people inside it actually were. The bones, the mystery, and what's still buried. Even now, after every bone has been studied and every object recorded, the most important question about this chamber still has no answer. Nobody knows who these 12 people really were to each other, but the culture they came from can still tell us something science alone cannot. It can show us how they actually saw death itself. The Nabateans practiced something called a marzia. This was a structured, repeated funeral meal, eaten inside the actual tombs of their ancestors. This was never a single visit out of respect. It happened again and again, year after year. Generations of children grew up sitting down to real meals, surrounded by the bones of people who had died long before they were even born. Some researchers have proposed an even darker theory, one that is still debated and far from confirmed. According to this idea, bodies may not have gone straight into a tomb after death. Instead, they may have first been left out in the open, on high platforms above the city, exposed completely to the birds. Only after the flesh was gone would the clean bones be gathered and finally sealed away. If that theory turns out to be true, it changes everything about the 12 skeletons in this chamber. The bodies that looked so carefully preserved may have already gone through something brutal and deliberate, long before they were ever placed inside that circle. This same culture also explains the massive stone blocks mentioned earlier, the ones locals still call the jinn blocks. The belief that spirits lived inside those stones was never separate from how this culture treated death. To them, death was never something to be locked away and forgotten. It stayed close. It stayed present, in the meals, in the stone, in the land itself. And there is something even bigger still waiting underground. Archaeologists estimate that as much as 85% of Petra has never been excavated at all. Everything tourists walk past today, every photo taken in front of the Treasury, is only a small fraction of what actually exists beneath the surface. In 2016, this became impossible to ignore. Space archaeologist Dr. Sarah Parcak and Petra researcher Christopher Tuttle used satellite imaging to find a massive ceremonial platform just outside the main city. It was roughly the size of an Olympic swimming pool, and it had sat there completely unnoticed for over 2,000 years. If something that large could stay hidden for 2 millennia, then a sealed room holding 12 unidentified bodies is proof of exactly how much of this city's real history remains completely unknown. This story began with a single question: what was really buried beneath Petra, and how much of what we thought we knew about this city was wrong? The honest answer is that nobody actually knows. What has been found so far might only be the smallest piece of it. So now it is your turn. What do you think is still buried beneath the other 85%? Share your theory in the comments below.